AskReddit by Just Browse in Zero. Employers of Reddit, what can someone put on a resume that sends it straight to the shredder? Attention, if you plan to give examples of a bad inappropriate email address on a resume, do not post an email address even if it's obviously fake. Rather use something like childish email here or @example.com. Otherwise your comment will not be seen. We do not allow any type of personal information, even if it's supposed to be fake. See Rule 4, https://www.reddit.com/r/wiki/index-wiki_rule_4- details. Thanks. I am a bot, and this action was performed automatically. Please contact the moderators of this subreddit. Message compose $r AskReddit if you have any questions or concerns. Attention to detail. Quick Learner, Microsoft Office, QuickBooks, Sage 50, Payroll. Attention to detail. That's twice the attention to detail. Make sure you attach the right file. I once had somebody attach his court summons for a DUI charge. Instant deny. I once received a resume in the mail that had no telephone number, address or email. He called a few days later to ask why he hadn't received any reply. I asked him to get a copy of his resume so we could review it together. I asked him to tell me the address we might have replied to, then the telephone number, and finally the email. After a long pause, he said, "AWW, fuck," and hung up. I used to manage a restaurant and also remember getting a resume without phone number or email. Funny stuff. One resume I got while managing a head shop included how much he could bench and the characters he played in high school theater. He was in his late mid-20s. Sounds like Andy Bernard. Okay, I was a writing tutor at the college level for 10 years. We also helped graduates of the university. I swear I am not making this up. A graduate who had worked teaching English in Japan, and at other positions, for a few years after getting his degree came in for help updating his resume. He reported that he'd been looking for work for a while, with no luck. The profile section at the head of his resume listed accomplishments including, "I have climbed Mount Fuji fueled only by Quaaludes and caffeine." He was crestfallen when I told him that although I was duly impressed by this feat, he really needed to remove it. Edit, because of course. How do you climb Mt. Fuji? Go upper, then go downer. Well, guy made it through the resume but almost didn't make it through the onboarding paperwork. Entry level position. Guy was 19, I think. Nice enough kid, low life experience, but that's how it all starts, right? Emergency contact info. Name mom. Relationship good. And X200B. So like if we called your mom, and you were hurt, she'd care? That's fucking hilarious. Thank you. Nudes. Like, any picture of yourself is probably going to get the resume thrown out because of potential lawsuits, but hearing that shriek of "Dear God, why" from the hotel manager's desk while they were going through resumes was hilarious. Like, bro, your bed was not that nice. Why did you attach it? Not that I think that one necessarily should, but why would including a, obviously non-nude, headshot be a legal liability? I had one where under education he wrote "suck my dick and get me a job." I stared at the screen for a good 3 minutes when I read that. And, does he still like working for your company? I received a resume last week that had notes on it: insert relevant skills here and maybe change font, fill this space with buzzwords. This was on his LinkedIn profile as well. If you can't pay attention to the resume you send out, I can't trust you'll pay attention to anything else. Lorem ipsum. Had a dude turn in his application with black marker lines redacting all of his info. Only things left were his name, a phone number, and a note saying we can discuss these details during my interview. He, in fact, did not get an interview. Was his name Rusty Shackelford? Military spouse, with rank no less. Like, they put the rank of their military husband or wife, but they themselves were not in the military? This guy put a Tinder bio at the head of his resume. All his likes and dislikes, with a headshot of him holding an axe while looking sweaty. I do it work. At least if a computer or server ever needs to be felt like a tree, you know who to call. I used to work for a bar. A girl came in with an application saying she was 22 but then listed she'd graduated high school that year. I fired off a few questions then slipped in "What's your birthday?" She was barely 17. His mother handed it to me with him just quietly standing beside her, looking like this wasn't his idea. I had someone who didn't get shortlisted come in with their sister. Their sister started to tell me what my hiring practices were based on her experience at another company. I argued for like 2 minutes before realizing it was going nowhere, took another copy of the resume so that they'd leave, and shredded that one too. Guy didn't say a word the entire time. I didn't make it past the name line on someone's resume one time. We were hiring a CFO and googling their name revealed an SEC complaint for a 9-figure fraud. At the time, there wasn't a verdict on the books, but I wasn't gonna wait for one. See you never. In a prior role, I was hiring for a weekend night shift sanitation position and we tended to get really desperate people who applied. I reviewed the applicants with a coworker and she remembered seeing the name in the local paper recently. I googled the name and found the court records that the person had not only embezzled but also when caught tried to burn down the prior employer's office to the ground. When my HR team asked why I wasn't interviewing that person, they told me I had to interview them because it was illegal to base that decision on a pending not final legal case. It really sounds great to allow that person to work with highly concentrated chemicals in a food manufacturing plant. I was hiring for a lab technician job and this guy came highly recommended by someone in purchasing, I think it was. So he got a shot at the interview. His resume wasn't terrible, but there were gaps. He listed his high school graduation date and then his AA degree from the local CC was a good 10 years later. I mean, that's okay, but there was no work experience listed for that time period either, so. Then came the interview with my lead technician and me. Walk the guy into a small meeting room and sit down. Before I can even introduce us, he pulls this laminated piece of paper out of his folio, slams it down on the table and pushes it across the table and says, "So when do I start?" The document was a letter of recommendation from his CC physics teacher. A glowing assessment of the candidate which greatly conflicted with my assessment based on his behavior. He did not get the job. Laminated? When I was in high school I worked in a shoe store at the mall. We got a resume once for a sales job that had, under the other interests section, special relationship with the one they call Satan. Yes, really. I wanted to interview her, just to see what she'd actually say in person. My manager vetoed that, sadly. I have a friend that managed a shoe store. She received an application that said I play ukulele, sort of under the skills section. I think about it on a regular basis and it was probably 10 years ago. Edit, this was the only thing listed under skills and it was filled out in pencil. I think we are all giving this person too much credit by saying that they were just trying to stand out. A couple we didn't shred but definitely did not call and saved for future laughs. Can cook anything related to potato, followed by the longest list of potato dishes I have ever seen, and this job did not involve food in any form. In special memberships section, have a Blockbuster card. You missed out on getting a full-fledged Tubermancer for your office. Time Person of the Year 2006. I had a HS-aged kid do this in 2014 range. I was unaware of what it was before googling it. I laughed, appreciated the joke. Job was a seasonal job conducive to HS students. I invited the kid in for an interview, that he no-showed. I was fully prepared to ask about it during the interview. Had one guy put I'm a sex offender who fucked a child, but I'm working on it on his resume. I'm an attorney and promptly told HR to blacklist that individual for liability purposes. We work in tech with a daycare on site, no shot in hell. Did they seriously actually literally write that? Well, on the plus side they announce themselves loud and clear so people can stay away. I once got a resume with the worst formatting and grammar. It was clear the person was a non-native English speaker. I don't usually do this, but I recreated her resume, reorganized it and corrected grammar spelling mistakes and sent it back to her. I hope she got a job. She wasn't a good fit based on her resume, otherwise I would have given her the benefit of the doubt and at least interviewed her. I did this for a helicopter engineer and pilot who had just left the Canadian military for the first time. Her resume was bonkers. Just a giant list of every single last thing she had ever done in chronological order going back nearly 20 years. It was several pages. I cut it down to a one-pager and sent it back, explaining that a network engineer job might not quite translate from fixing and flying helicopters, but I wished her the best. She emailed me back to say my version of her resume made no sense because it only showed the last 8 years. There's no saving some people. Had a guy put on his resume that he invented the dollar, owned Microsoft and Google and Ford, was an astronaut, and founded New Zealand. This was when I managed an Aldi store and he was applying as an associate. But he was clear to say on his resume that our business model could be vastly improved with his expertise. I almost brought him in for an interview just for fun, but I couldn't really find the time along with the real applicants. Ah, you lucky duck, getting George Santos to apply at your Aldi. Life coach and all their education is from sketchy seminars at the Radisson by the airport. That's and hashtag boss babe, CEO of their makeup MLM. My stepbrother, after mooching off my father for 2 decades, told us he wanted to go into career coaching at the funeral. Like, dude, you've worked as a retail manager 25 years ago and doing sales in dad's office. What the F will you advise people to do? Food service experience applying for entry-level call center job put as her daily duties wept and moped at the end of every shift. I'm not gonna lie, I hired her and she was fine. I worked food service and was like, where's the lie? I often wept at the end of my food service shifts. It really lowered morale as I was the shift lead.